in Greek, logos. And it speaks of a spiritual connection. It speaks of a spiritual connection that results from our obedience to the originator of the act, whether it be good or bad, whether it be hurtful or profitable for our neighbor. And this spiritual connection, not a physical encounter, happens during the performance of the act. When we speak of the spiritual logos, we're referring to whenever we perform an act, and this act affords us union to the source of the act, whether it be good or bad, whether it be good and profitable or hurtful and wicked, whether it be righteous or evil. And God defines evil or wicked as that which is hurtful to our neighbor, and therefore is not what God requires of us. It is not required of us because it is hurtful to our neighbor. It is off the mark because it does not show agape love, God's love to our neighbor. And just to remind you of what agape love is, I would like us to go to the lexical aids and number 26. Agape. Where it says, agape is love, indicates a direction of the will and finding one's joy. I beg your pardon, that's 25. 26, agape love. Before we get to that, I'd like you to look at, hold the lexical and go to the Greek dictionary, Strong's, to see what it says. Agape, from 25, which is what I had begun to explain to you as to love, the act of. And it says, love, affection, or benevolence. But I want to indicate to you very early on that it is not about affection, it is not about a strong feeling. This agape love that speaks of the love of God, it is not about emotion. It doesn't speak of feeling a strong desire to please someone. It goes beyond that. And if you turn back to the lexical with me, you will see that it says, agape is love, a word not found in classical Greek, but only in revealed religion. Translated charity in 1 Corinthians 13:1, meaning benevolent love. Its benevolence, however, and this is very important. Are you there with me? Its benevolence, however, is not shown by doing what the person loved desires. It goes beyond that. But what the one who loves deems as needed by the one loved. So if you love someone and you're speaking about agape love in the Greek sense of the word, then you're speaking about wanting to do for someone perhaps what that person does not want done for themselves. I continue to read. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, John 3:16. He gave not what man wanted. I wonder if you're understanding what this is saying. He says, he gave not what man wanted just because we don't want Jesus. You see, it's not talking about the physical Jesus, but we don't want a Savior. We don't want Jesus Christ to come into our lives and to dictate to us what we ought to do, because we want to do what we feel is right. But what God did was that he sent Jesus Christ as a living God to deal with our lives on a daily basis. And that is what we don't want. But in spite of all that, God loves us with a pure love in spite of what we want. And he still sent us Jesus Christ as the only means for our salvation. I wonder if you're there with me. He gave not what man wanted because we don't want Jesus to save us. We want our nature to remain exactly what it has always been. We want to do the things that we feel are right, and we don't want to submit to the authority of Jesus Christ. He gave not what man wanted, but what man needed as God perceived his need, namely his Son, who brought forgiveness to man, not by the act of his dying on the cross, but by our allowing Jesus Christ into our lives because he's the risen Lord. Amen. There's a difference between believing and accepting that Jesus came to save us and that it's okay to believe that he died on the cross once he doesn't interfere with our lives. And what I'm saying to you is that is not enough, because Jesus wants to intervene in our lives in order to change our nature. That's his desire. He gave not what man wanted, but what man needed as God perceived his need, namely his Son who brought forgiveness to man. God's love for man is his doing what he thinks best for man and not what man desires, because what man desires is to remain morally depraved, is to remain as he is, wallowing in the physical. But God is not a God who is physical, so he tries, and what he desires for us is to alleviate us from that physical condition, which is our curse. I wonder if you're there. God's love for man is his doing what he thinks best for man and not what man desires. You see, it's on a daily basis. It's not what he did 2,000 years ago, but what Jesus Christ wants to do for you today. He thinks best for man and not what man desires. It is God's willful direction towards man. The intervention of Jesus Christ in our lives, in our daily lives, is the direction that God desires for us to walk towards. What God requires of us is that we allow Jesus Christ to intervene in our lives in spite of what we desire, because we know that he's God and he knows best. It is God's willful direction towards man. He intended it to be that way, that our salvation be only by the spiritual works of Jesus Christ and not by any physical works. But for man to show love to God, he must first appropriate God's agape love. For only God has such an unselfish love. I wonder if you're with me on this one. It is beyond us to show this sincere, pure love to our brothers or our neighbor. It is beyond us, because what is in our natural nature is to do things that give us pleasure, which would work to the detriment of my brother or my neighbor. In order for us to achieve or have this love in us, our whole nature must be reversed. Our whole nature must die. And the only how that can take place is by us assuming the nature of Jesus Christ, or our becoming like him, because we are in submission to what he says for our lives. I wonder if you're still there. It's very plain. It is very plain. Anything that is not of this nature towards our brother, anything that does not profit my neighbor or my brother, is falling short of the mark that God desires for us. The only thing that is right for us is what helps our neighbor. If we could just imagine what this means. if you could just consider it for a moment, then we would see that the depressing situation in this island would be transformed to a life that approaches the glory of God in the spiritual ages, because we wouldn't be doing anything whatsoever to build me up at the expense of my neighbor. You see, there's nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong in building up yourself, providing it does not detract from your neighbor. But the minute everyone is eating everyone else to advance himself at the expense of his neighbor, then you get the situation that we have in this country right now, which is a depressing one. And it is first approaching the goal of the oppressor to have everyone in this country oppressed, just like he's oppressed, being separated from the nature that God desires for us to have. And we can't blame God for that, because all the while, God has been speaking to us to try and do what is profitable for our neighbor. I wonder if you're there. I am speaking very plainly. As long as we don't have repentance in this nation, we are headlong in a direction that is going to make this island a very depressing place to live in, one from which you desire to escape, because there is so much oppression and sadness and destruction around you, even over and above the extent of normal oppression. What truly helps our neighbor is what God requires of us and is righteous, even if our neighbor does not want for us to do it for them. God designed this ministry that we are intermingled with, was designed in order not to be an answer for people, but to point them in the direction of the answer, which is Christ. And knowing Christ on a daily basis in a spiritual way, not a physical way, because that's the only escape route that we have from the natural realm. It's the only way. It's the only thing that God has provided for us in his agape love towards us, in that he has provided us Jesus Christ as the answer to all our problems, and all we have to do is know him and submit to him. The Lord always gives us a solution. He always has a prescription to every problem. And no matter what your problem is, it can be overcome, overwhelmed, and you can have victory in your life if we would just accept the invitation, the call that God sends out in Jesus Christ. I'm just speaking a very simple message this morning that you ought to very easily lock into, in spite of the fact that you may be slightly rusty. A good act is defined as such if it is originated in God, and therefore is a righteous act, one that results in God being satisfied with us, since it fulfills God's claim on us, since it was what God desires from us, that the act be profitable to our neighbor. We are here on this earth to facilitate our neighbor's relationship with God in Christ Jesus. That's our primary objective as individuals and as a ministry. This is the problem. This is at the heart of the problem. Knowledge of the good act. How do we come by knowledge of the works that are required of us? Knowledge of any good act can only be attained in Christ Jesus. And since Jesus Christ is no longer on this earth, but in the heavens, one, the knowledge cannot be communicated by a physical being in a physical way. Two, the knowledge cannot be something that Christ spoke generally about when he was on this earth 2,000 years ago. Since our specific situation did not exist at that time. Three, the knowledge communicated to us from the Father in Christ Jesus is knowledge of an action conceived of in the conceptual age by the Father and already worked in the Rhema age that can only be communicated in a way that a spiritual God can communicate to us, since it is of the nature of a spiritual work. If it were of a physical work, then the knowledge of that work may be communicated to us in a physical way. But since it is a spiritual work, then the knowledge of that work can only be communicated to us, obviously, self-evident, in a spiritual way. Physical beings communicate physically. We speak with words and with signs. Jesus Christ communicates to us spiritually in images and in visions and in revelation, which is an efficient way. It's concise, it's precise, and it's perfect, leaving no need for interpretation, no clarification, because what is intended is very clear. There's no room for manipulating what you saw. You see, you can manipulate, you can maneuver what I'm speaking to fit your brother rather than yourself, but that is not what God intends this morning. The only way we can know what God wants of us is if Christ makes that clear to us in a spiritual communication called revelation or the declaration. I wonder if you're still there. An evil act, a wicked act, a hurtful act is defined as such if it is sourced not in God and may be either as a result of direct prompting of the oppressor or may be the result of indirect instigation of the oppressor. I want you to stay with me. You see, why am I getting into this evil act and into this explaining of an evil act? It's because if you're in submission to these acts, then you are united to the one who originated that act when you're involved in that act. And so it's another warning to us that we ought to be careful when we do anything to first identify the source of the act and who we are actually being connected to when we're involved in that act, as a warning to us. Not that I feel I'm better than anybody, but that I'm indicating to you so that you may consider who is the source of the actions that you are involved in. Because when you submit to that source, you have a perfect access to that person. Spiritual. And I am not speaking of possession. I want you to understand, I'm not speaking of possession by demons. You know, because that seems to be always about someone else. We can never identify ourselves with that. But this being led into evil acts by the oppressor, which affords us a connection and full access by the oppressor to us is what you need to consider whenever you're involved in anything. You need to consider it, and you need to understand that besides possession, there is always oppression. And no matter how great you think that an act is, if the source is of the Father in Jesus Christ, then you are being oppressed and you're being separated from who you could become because you are being misled by the oppressor. I'm just trying to draw a distinction between possession and oppression, because what Jesus Christ wants is far from oppression. He wants us to be liberated in himself. You see, a spiritual logos, a spiritual connection can either be righteous or it can be wicked. You need to be wary of that fact. You need to consider that fact. And you need to consider the source of your own actions. With the oppressor having remodeled us in his image of rebellion and wickedness, having perverted, having subverted the nature that we were created in, all the oppressor has to do, you see, he doesn't have to give you direct instructions. All he has to do is sit back and wait for our moral depravity to kick in, which will happen as long as the declaration does not begin the process of reformation in our lives. If we're not in our assigned course, if we're not in a state of having Jesus Christ reverse our nature, then all the oppressor has to do, he doesn't have to lead you directly. He doesn't have to give you a picture of a deed for you to follow it. All he has to do is leave you on your own, and your imagination and your nature subverted is going to lead you down the road. And those acts in itself, whether they were directly or indirectly instigated by the enemy, results in the same thing. I wonder if you're there. You see, the devil ain't got to come before you and say, do so and so. If you do it on your own, because you're led along those lines, because your nature has not been reversed, then the result is still the same. He has total access to you at any time, and you're in the process of going to hell, and you're involved in evil and hateful and hurtful acts that are not pleasing to God. I wonder if you're there with me. Having remodeled us in his image of rebellion and wickedness, all the oppressor has to do is sit back and wait for our moral depravity to kick in. And it's going to happen as long as we're not receiving knowledge in declaration from Jesus Christ as to what works we ought to be involved in so as to be a benefit to our neighbor. As long as we do not receive the declaration. And if you're there. You see, the only thing that can take you off the road towards destruction is knowledge from God in Jesus Christ. And it can only come to you in a spiritual revelation called the declaration. Now, as long as you have not received this declaration, know that you are not in the way of the Lord. Or, as long as you do not pay attention to what was declared to you, maybe you've seen something in Jesus Christ, but if you're not paying attention to it, if you're not giving it prominence and weight and importance and priority in your life, then your nature has not been reversed. And all the oppressor has to do is sit back and wait for your moral depravity to kick in. Moral depravity does not just mean that we're involved in the act, but that we as human beings are subject to the diseased condition of our soul. This condition is what Christ desires to undo. You see, Jesus created us as human beings in perfection. The enemy came and subverted that perfection. Now all that Jesus Christ is trying to do in our lives is to reverse our nature back to the perfection that he created us in. It can only happen in fits and spurts. It's like you take a long line and just imagine an inch apart from each other, you have these spiritual experiences. And between these spiritual experiences, you have your physical, natural life. Well, what I'm saying to you is that the way of the Lord is if you take away all the lines and you just put all the experiences together, and that forms the backbone of your assigned course, which is only what Jesus Christ is interested in. Jesus Christ is not interested in the rest of your physical life. It is offensive to him. And all that Jesus Christ wants to see is the experiences, the encounters that we have with him. It is these experiences and encounters with Jesus Christ, not as we lay back and enjoy our lives, but as we function in ministry. It is these experiences that is the ark of safety that takes us through this oppressing life. That is the physical condition. I wonder if you're there. I want you to stay with me, please. Don't wander off. Moral depravity does not just mean that you're doing something. It means that we're inclined that way. That our lust pushes us to want to fulfill all our carnal desires, all our fleshly desires. That desire in itself, that burning passion within us, is our moral depravity. And that is what Jesus wants to rob us of. He wants to take that away in order to give us spiritual life. Now, if you consider it robbing, well, obviously you are on the wrong side of the fence. All that Jesus wants to do, his entire work, revolves around reversing our nature, which only takes place when we are spiritually connected to a spiritual work on the other side. All the times in between that we're not encountering Jesus Christ in ministry, our nature is not reversed to what God requires it to be. I want to tell you something which I guess some of you are going to say, well, there goes Brother Sam again. Because when people hear these things, they just lock off the tapes or they turn off the radio and they don't want to listen anymore. But you see, like I told you before, I cannot tailor make the declaration that God has given to me in order to fit in people's carnal mind, because I would be rejecting Jesus Christ by so doing. What I'm saying to you is that the only how that our nature is reversed is because of Christ Jesus' work in the heavens, not his earthly historical work. Just let me slow down a bit and give you some more on this moral depravity. It means that you must be doing something. What it means is that we all, not you, we all, Paul, Peter, James, John, we all have an inclination, a leaning, a tendency towards acts of moral depravity, that we have the desire to be partakers in these acts, even if we do not. And even if we do not, it is still moral depravity, and it is still sin. Is anybody there? It's not that you could think about it, but once you don't do it, it's sin. Jesus Christ taught us in his word, in the Bible, in the physical logos, in Matthew 5. If you'd go there with me, please. Just let me pronounce this. Matthew 5:27 and 28. You have heard, it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, all who looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. This is the standard of Jesus Christ. There is no other standard. And we all fail it because we have this line that's between two experiences. That is a physical condition. And once we are not in a spiritual connection to Jesus Christ, then our nature is not reversed, and we are subject to moral depravity. And don't try and fool me. Don't try and tell me you're just busy with other things why you can't see God. It's not acceptable to me, because I know better than that from my own self. Are you still there? This moral depravity means that we all, as long as we're not spiritually connected to Jesus Christ because of ministry, or because we're receiving a declaration that we are subject to this moral depravity, and that we have a desire to be partakers in these acts, even if we do not, that we have a burning desire, a passion to be partakers, that we are naturally drawn after our own lusts, which means that we have a tendency to want to fulfill these desires. There's a way out. There's a way out. But what I'm saying to you is, as long, and you don't need to confess it to Brother Sam, you don't need to confess it to the brethren in the church, just confess it to yourself. Once you are into this moral depravity, because like I said, there's a way out. There's a way out. And the closer you bring your spiritual encounters with Jesus closer together, and that line becomes smaller and smaller, then the far less you are subject to this moral depravity. But you need to look at yourself and you need to consider, are you subject to moral depravity? Are your desires out of control? Are you being controlled by your passion, by your burning desires? then if you are, then it's a sign from God to you. It's a sign to indicate to you that there is something wrong in your life. Like I said, you don't need to confess to me. Confess to yourself and seek God. It's a sign, this state of moral depravity. If you're in it, brethren, don't be afraid to look at God. If you're in it, there's a way out. And if you're in it, it's a sign to you that you're not where God desires for you to be. Only you can know if you're satisfied with your relationship with God. You don't need to convince me that you're satisfied, that things are going swell with you. Convince yourself. Be free from the oppression of the oppressor. Be free in Jesus Christ. And know that you can be free from this moral depravity and this oppression. Know it because Jesus Christ is the answer that God has given to us in Himself. There's a way out. There is a way out. I want you to go with me, please, to James 1:21. There's a way out. And James teaches us that even in our natural capacity as human beings, we have the power. We have the power, even though we be tempted. I wonder if you're there. Even though if it comes before us, we have the power to set this moral depravity aside. Otherwise, James would not have said in James 1:21, consequently, lay aside all filthiness and abundance of depravity. He would not have said it if he didn't know that it could be set aside even in your natural capabilities. Because God is not going to set it aside for you. You have got to set aside your own depravity by yourself. Wherefore, lay aside all filthiness and superabundance or abundance of depravity. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you do that, after you deal with your own depravity, which you have, all you have to do is make up your mind. Make up your mind and have a determination not to succumb again, because you are aware that it's not worth your salvation. When it all comes down to it and you consider life in eternity, you're going to see that it's not really worth it, that nothing on this earth is worth surrendering your salvation to the devil, because he can't take it from you. He can't. You would have to submit to your natural depravity, and you'd have to submit to what he wants you to do. But he can't make you if you decide that you don't want it. I wonder if you're there. Maybe you ought to turn to Matthew 22 with me a minute. God invites He calls everybody. He invites everybody. Matthew 22 from 1. Matthew chapter 22 verse 1. And Jesus answered and spake unto them again by parables. Now, maybe I should just stop a minute and look at the lexical for parables, for you to understand that Jesus' entire life was a parable. Not just what he said, and that he didn't speak without parables, because everything he said, who's there with me, was in parables. Who knows that? $38.50. following meanings are to be distinguished. 1. A comparison, similitudes, or simile in which one thing is compared with another, particularly spiritual things with natural, by which means such spiritual things are better understood. They don't perfectly represent the spiritual thing, but they are understood because you cannot perfectly describe things that are spiritual with physical language. I wonder if you're there. By which means spiritual things are better understood and make the deeper impression, because what we really want is the deeper thing. We want the spiritual thing to be understood and make the deeper impression on the honest, the sincere and attentive hearer, while simultaneously they are concealed from the gross, carnal and inattentive. It doesn't need an explanation. 2, because these comparisons have an obscurity in their very nature, the word is used to denote a speech or maxim which is obscure to the person who hears it, even though it contains no comparison. Look at number 5. And this is of the essence. A visible type of emblem representing something different from and beyond itself. The Mosaic Tabernacle with its services was a parable, a type, an emblem, a figurative representation of the good things of Christianity. Jesus doesn't want you to look at the parable. He wants you to look at that which is beyond the parable. He doesn't want you to look at his physical life, because his physical life cannot save you. It's the things that he's working in the spiritual ages in the heavens that has the key to your salvation. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a human king. It's not a certain king. It's a human king. I wonder if you're seeing the resemblance and why this is called a parable. Because Jesus Christ was speaking of something that's much deeper, and he's representing it by speaking of us as physical things and beings. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a human king, which made a marriage for his son and sent forth his servants to call the called. It's not them that were bidden. It's the same Greek word used twice in a different way. And sent forth his servants to call the ones who are called to the wedding. And they would not come. I want you to look at the word thelo, represented by the number 2309, quickly if you would. In the lexical. Quickly if you would please, 2309. I want you to see this. Thelo indicates not only willing something, but also pressing into action. They were not willing. Did you see that? It's not just desiring it, but pressing onto it with determination. I also want you to look at thelo in the Strong's 2309, the back of the book on page 36. To choose or prefer. You all are getting the invitation. You're getting the call. But you're choosing not to respond. It's a choice. People are preferring. They're preferring their depravity over the riches of God's glory in eternity. Again, he sent forth other servants saying, tell them which are called, behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fatlings are killed. No, obviously we never eat in heaven because we're going to be spiritual. But it's a parable. It's expressing something that's deeper than what's there. And all things are ready. All are ready. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it. The original word in the Greek says were careless. They were not interested. they were not concerned and went their own way. And the remnant took his servants and abused and slew them. But when the king heard thereof, he became exasperated. He didn't know what more to do. He did not know what to do. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but the called were not suitable. They were not worthy. The invitation has been made to all of us by Jesus Christ and through others. We all have heard the call to repentance. But either we choose not to heed what is being said, or we just careless. We just couldn't care. I wonder if you're still there. We have it within our own power. We were in James 1:21. Go back there with me, please. We have it within our power to control our moral depravity for as long as it would take for Jesus Christ to reach us in a declaration, for us to pay attention to what he's saying, and then his power is going to take over. We would not have to control our moral depravity for the rest of our lives, but for just long enough for Jesus Christ to reach us. Why can't we do it? He's not asking you that you do it for the rest of your life. He's asking you that you do it just for a short while until he can get to us. That's all that he's asking. Because once you're in your assigned course, you'd be sold out for Jesus Christ just like me. James is telling us that we can. The first condition is that we lay aside our depravity. The second condition is that we receive with humility. You know what humility means? It doesn't mean that you cower down. It's not a posture. It's not an attitude. It is active. It is not passive. It is something that we do. With humility means that we submit to it. We submit to the implanted logos. I wonder if you're there. The word in the original Greek was not engrafted but implanted. I want you to hear me, please. It's not, I want you to hear me well. It is not that Jesus Christ is implanted in us. I wonder if you can hear what I'm saying. It isn't that Jesus Christ is in us. I want you to hear me. Because we are existing in a physical condition. How can a pure and holy God be embedded in a physical condition? It cannot happen. We have to be translated to the spiritual ages, and then we are engrafted or implanted into Jesus Christ on the other side. Not that he comes down here, but because we have carnally repented, because we have controlled our moral depravity. And the condition is very clear in James 1:21. If we lay aside our depravity, then the Logos is going to be offered to us. I wonder if you're noticing the condition that's in the verse. The second part of the verse is not going to take place until you fulfill the first part. Until you lay aside your own moral depravity, not your brother's. Not finding fault with your brother, but your own moral depravity. When you put that aside, then the Logos, Jesus Christ, and the spiritual walk and the connection to it will be offered to you. And James is saying, if you put away your moral depravity and that spiritual connection that Jesus Christ is offered to you by offering us to function in our physical walk, then James is saying, please submit to that work, because that work and you're staying away from your moral depravity is where your salvation is going to come from. Look at verse 21 towards the end. I wonder if you're there. It's very simple. You don't have to be like that well up in Jesus Christ to understand what I'm saying this morning. It takes your controlling your moral depravity for as long as is necessary for Jesus to make you an offer of himself and of a spiritual walk that he wants us to be connected to if we are submissive to the physical walk that he shows us that we ought to be submitted to. I wonder if you're there. Our mind translates the spiritual walk to a physical expression, because as human beings, as physical beings, that's all we can function in. Jesus shows us the spiritual walk, and we translate it into a physical walk, and that is the walk that Jesus wants us to express in a physical way because of our spiritual connection to the work. I wonder if you all are still here. It is not, when you read verse 21, it sounds as if the implanted word is a word that's implanted in us. It is not. It is not. And the natural mind would tend to receive it in that fashion. What I'm saying to you is that we have to be taken to the spiritual ages. We have to be translated to a level of existence that's spiritual by the Holy Ghost. And that will only happen if we lay aside our moral depravity. Are you there? Now, once you're there, because the Holy Ghost has taken you up, and he only does that because you have laid aside your depravity, once you're there, Jesus Christ can show you something. Now, when you submit to it, you may be implanted and connected to Jesus Christ for as long as you're there, not beyond that time. I think I've made this perfectly clear. I don't want to dwell too much on it. The only way that the engrafted Logos is going to be offered to us is if we lay aside all filthiness and superabundance of depravity. Now the Logos in James 1:21 and anywhere else where it's speaking of a spiritual Logos speaks of a spiritual connection. The engrafted or the implanted speaks of that we were not undefined before. I wonder if you're there. We were not connected to the spiritual ages in Jesus Christ before. We were not connected before we laid aside our depravity. We have to lay it aside, and that's the first condition. The second condition is Christ shows us the declaration, and we have to receive it with humility, which is receive it with submission, submit to it, so that we can be engrafted to the Logos, so that we can be connected to Jesus Christ, so that we can have this spiritual connection. I wonder if you're there. What James is saying is that we lay aside our depravity so that we can be connected to the spiritual ages, to the spiritual walk that is there for us, and to Jesus Christ. Who is here? We have it within our power to lay aside our moral depravity. We have it within ourselves to lay aside the filth. And all we have to do it is for long enough to hear from God. Once we are in the assigned course and connected to the spiritual ages, our nature is reversed. Our nature is not reversed when we are taken to the spiritual ages. I wonder if you're there. You can be taken to the spiritual ages to receive a declaration from Jesus Christ. Your nature is still not reversed. You have been translated, but your nature has not been reversed. Your nature is only reversed when you're connected to the spiritual work, to Jesus Christ, and therefore to the Father. Then is when your nature is reversed. And this is a definition that we cannot change. What is required of us is that we stay as much as we can and for as long as we can in our assigned course until it is finished, so that our nature would be in a state of constant being repaired in order for us to arrive back at the place where God desires for us to be. I wonder if you're still there. Stay with me. What I'm saying to you, this is what the evil one is trying to stop. The reversing of our nature. And he's going to throw everything at you to keep you from having this reversal. What I'm saying to you is, as long as your nature is not reversed, the enemy does not have to do much, since without Jesus Christ, we are in the nature that dictates that we automatically do the things that the oppressor desires without him even leading us. Even in the case when the oppressor does not directly lead us, since the act is of his nature, that act affords us union to the oppressor and establishes us in the oppressor. And we are of like nature, which is what? Which is preventing others from drawing close to Jesus Christ and their own nature that Jesus wants to share with them. Are you there? These evil acts cement your relationship with the oppressor, and it confirms the fact that you are in his control, and it all happens because of moral depravity. I want to slow a little bit and just walk you through one very essential fact before we press on. When Jesus Christ created us, and he did create all things, in the Old Testament, at the beginning of Genesis, it does not make direct mention of his name because they did not have the privilege to know his name, since he was not yet physically born. Even though Adam did have access to Jesus Christ, Adam had access to Christ even though he did not know his name, which would only be revealed in Jesus' physical life. When Jesus created us as physical beings, he did not create us in the nature we find ourselves in now, but in perfection with access to Christ our God. The perfection came from the fact that we did have access to Christ. I wonder if you're there. This fact of access to Jesus Christ frees us, and it ends in our total freedom. It's this access that we lost in Adam. The perfection came from the fact that we did have access to Christ, and that Christ could lead mankind on a daily basis. All we knew back then was perfection and righteousness. And since that was all that we knew, since it was all that we were aware of, then that was all that we did. The problem is that we don't know the works that Jesus Christ desires for us.